processing. Hopefully you all received the processing subgroup meeting notes. Again, thank you to Miriam for producing those, and had an opportunity to review them before today's call. I was not part of that meeting, similarly to the tier group meeting that we had yesterday. And so I'm relying heavily on the notes and on your collective memory around where you left off and where you think it's going to be most productive to spend our time today. We have up to, I believe, an hour and a half. Is that what we scheduled?
Yes.
If needed. And again, the goal is to, by the end of the session today, have developed some, the makings of some recommendations to bring back to the full task force on October 7th. If you were on the call yesterday, I think I had alluded to the fact that we might be in one of the Deering rooms for the October meeting. I was mistaken. We're still working on that. And so we will send a note out as to what that location is, along with an agenda closer to that date. So as I reviewed the notes, some of the highlights that jumped out to me, and I'll just kind of summarize a little bit and then throw it out to you as to where you'd like to begin. But that in particular, we have a small number of fluid milk processors in the state. We'd like to figure out how to best support them so that they continue to be a stable outlet for fluid milk. That there is currently no organic processing capacity in the state, and that ideally there would be. That those farms that are accepting milk from other farms to process them in some manner, you all would like to figure out ways to best support those particular farms, either in their current iteration or in expanding their capacity. You talked about both cooperative processing models as something to explore, and also co-packing as potentially a first step that was also needed. So when I looked at the second page, the avenues to change, I did see some makings of recommendations, particularly around, because we've talked about this previously in other groups as well, about improving technical assistance for on-farm processing. I think no doubt that will end up being a recommendation of some sort. But in terms of specific recommendations about increasing processing capacity, I think that's where the attention needs to be placed today, both in expanding existing capacity and creating potentially new capacity. So I'll stop talking. See where you all would like to begin, or reflections that you had in reviewing the notes. And I see we do have a public member of Bill. And go ahead, Julie. Hi, Representative Pluker. And go ahead, Julie. Julie Marie, sorry.
I just wanted to, I'm sure everybody has heard, but just to make sure, that Holton Farms has announced that they will, as of the end of September, no longer be processing their white milk line, fluid milk line. They are going to attempt to retain the ability to process chocolate milk. They're going to continue doing ice cream and butter, both provided that they can secure a source of cream. And I just happened to speak with them this morning, and they're still in the process of trying to figure that out. But what it has meant is they secured about 80% of their milk supply from a single farm, and that farm has already contracted to sell their cows at the end of the month. So it means that there's a shift in the processing landscape in Maine. It's really only the loss of a product line. It's not necessarily the loss of a processor, but it does change the dynamics of how we look at the processors within our state, in that we had been focusing on the fact that they were mostly fluid milk, and now we have one plant that's pivoting away from that and focusing more on class 2 and 4 products. So just as an update.
Yep.
As someone who's not familiar with Holton Farms, just a quick question. I mean, I know that they're a little more regional in the part of the state that I don't get to very often. I mean, can you just tell me like their sort of niche or MO? I mean, anything about that particular product that differentiates itself from anything else in the marketplace that will now be disappearing off the shelf?
Well, since the only thing they're discontinuing is the fluid milk line,
Right.
the white fluid milk line.
Yep.
Having grown up on their fluid milk, I gotta say I'm kind of partial. I mean, it's everybody has their favorite
Sure.
taste type thing. They really have, that has been the backbone of their operation, but where their growth has been since the Lincoln family took over in 1982-84 has been in ice cream. They operate 3 dairy bars, and that has grown significantly. And butter, people travel from hundreds of miles away to get their butter, and so those things are going to continue, along with their chocolate milk, which just, I think, sells better than, it's the same problem that we're having everywhere else. Not as many people are drinking their milk. They're eating their dairy more these days. So you also, Holton Farms, so they were distributing from, I think, as far south as Lincoln, all the way through the county. That was their market area. And they are owned by the Lincoln family. And one of the dynamics that's interesting, the matriarch, Alice Lincoln, did the pool with me this morning. She's 84. Her sons and daughter-in-law have been doing the day-to-day operation, but I don't think there is a next generation. So, that is just something also to be mindful of in that particular situation. So I don't know if that's the kind of backdrop you were looking for, but.
And milk from them was plastic containers or cartons, or not glass bottles, I assume.
For as long as I can remember, it was cardboard, but I'm not sure if they had gone over to plastic. Again, I moved away a long time ago, so
Sure.
All I get is butter and ice cream when I go there.
Yep. No, I'm just always curious about what people see on the shelf from a regional producer. So.
Well, the interesting thing is all their dairy bars are marked by their logo is kind of a picture of their fluid milk cardboard carton. Mm-hmm. That is their emblem. And so there has been a lot of conversation, and concern about is that going to continue for them? And it probably is, because it's so recognizable up there.
Well, so what if we start from the beginning of at least where the notes suggest that you may have started the last time, which is, acknowledging, even in the context of the loss of that line of Holton Farms, that the 2 commodity fluid milk processors in the more southern part of the state, what we might do to ensure their longevity in Maine. Steve, you go ahead.
Thank you. So yeah, I spoke in view of what you just mentioned, the stability of those two operations is paramount, I think, as we start. In view of that, I did reach out to Dustin LaGrange, who is a board member of the Maine Dairy Nutrition Council. He's an employee of Oakhurst. He was an appointed board member for the Dairy Council. So I was going to speak with him. I had reached out to him a couple weeks ago with some questions along this line, about what potential needs might be that would be of interest. He wasn't at the meeting that we had last week. I was hoping to speak with him then. I've reached out to him again between then and now and haven't heard back, but he was very interested in the conversation we had, and I expected to hear back from him, and I'm sure I will, but I have not heard from him at this point. But at the next meeting at least, or maybe even before that, I could send some thoughts out that he relays to me. But so anyway, I've reached out to Oakhurst to find out what I can there.
Very helpful. That would be great. Thank you for doing that. And so, do we have any comparable thoughts about the other processor that we might be able to do the same there? We have, is it Rebecca who?
Rebecca works for Hood. Yeah.
And did she provide any perspective about that on the last call?
I don't think she said anything specific relating to Hood's future, other than she was able to give some, when we talk about, the ability of those two plants maybe to grow or to add on products and services. Both of them are very landlocked in their current locations, and to move those locations is, that you're talking the same costs as building a plant from scratch or a retrofit.
Right.
So I mean, they're kind of, they can do some internal modification if they wanted to add different product lines, but they're kind of, this is what they do. They do fluid products, and they don't just do. Both plants don't just do milk; they also do juice and water and tea and lemonade and some of those other drinks, because they utilize the same basic bottling process. So they're already diversified in that aspect.
Well, it does seem that since we're only talking about two processors, if we could get more specific feedback from Rebecca as well, in the same way that Steve's focused on Oakhurst, I think that could be helpful between now and your October 7th meeting. I don't know who is, best suited to do that amongst you, but just think on that for a moment while I take Bill. Go ahead.
Both plants reasonably well, and both corporations, DFA as well as Hood. Hood is very advanced in specializing the Portland plant on what it's producing for the entire Hood organization. And so the Portland plant shares product down to Linfield for distribution on other parts of New England of that specialty that they're doing. And there are indications that Oakhurst is also being moved in that direction for DFA because they also have a plant down in Connecticut. So the processes with multiple plants seem to be going to specialization of products. And when I had Moo Milk and we were unfortunately contemplating closing, I had discussions with Oakhurst, and they processed the rate of about 10,000 gallons an hour, which is almost, it's fast. That's a lot. So there isn't a lot of leeway in their processing capabilities.
Mhm, mhm. Okay,
Um,
well, you go ahead, Andy.
I guess just to follow up, I mean, from our meeting last time, it just really sounds like there isn't capacity at Oakhurst or Hood to do anything else in their existing plants. That was the vibe that I've gotten from multiple meetings now. That was the vibe that I've gotten as being part of a Momco, trying to start an organic processing company with Annie and a few others, trying to find a co-packer that we could work with. And it just seems like, we need to figure out a way to add processing capacity in our state that's going to be anchored in our state, that isn't going to be owned by an out-of-state company like DFA. So, just what can we do in that regard? A facility that can potentially offering co-packing services for companies that want to start up in dairy processing, because like we've talked about in the past, it's very challenging to start with a concept of a dairy processing business and have it achieve any sort of scale without taking out massive investments that are pretty hard to make. And I think also the reality of just the dairy landscape in our country is that it's going to be challenging to convince a for-profit entity to want to invest a ton of money in our state where we're not a massive dairy producer. So, I'm just wondering what other options there might be for us to consider when it comes to creating some sort of anchor of processing in the state. Just something to think about.
Yes, I agree. Do you have initial thoughts about that you want to share, given how deeply you've been engaged in trying to do this yourself?
Maybe I'll turn to Bill. I know that Bill has some strong ideas that he shared with some of us. So yeah, I'll put Bill on the spot.
Perfect. Bill.
All right, two things though. Besides Holton Farms, Smiling Hill also has some capacity. But Moo Milk utilized it, and their capacity when the plant is running without problems is about 500 gallons per hour. And they have limited staffing. So while there is a possibility of them being some sort of a co-packer, it's probably small. One of the other smaller co-packers was out in Western Foothills and whatnot, and that hasn't really been utilized for quite a while, and they were only doing about 100 gallons an hour. So there isn't too much in terms of co-packing available in the state. And when we were in Moo Milk, we had the same problem that exists in Smiling Hill today, is limited capacity as well as potentially quality problems, which we couldn't overcome. And for that reason, Moo went and spent a bunch of money with a company to create a full plan, which I've shared with the group. It's posted on all the information that we've got. It's a fully determined plant, and to process about 1,000 gallons per hour. And the original base cost of the plant, including a solar field and a tourist destination type thing, was just under $10 million. And packing line, which was envisioned to be in cardboard, was about another $1.5 million on top of that. So the total cost of that plant was about $11.5 million. And it would have had the capacity to do pretty much anything you wanted in fluid milk. There were some processing, other processing. It had been limited to larger quantity of milk to be distributed to people who needed smaller quantities. Basically, big bag in a box. And then they had small bag in a box, which was also going to be utilized for making ice cream mixes. Both for soft serve as well as hard serve. And both 2 flavors, vanilla and chocolate. So the design is there. I suspect that if we do want to understand more, that the company could probably upgrade things to current cost in some kind of 6-figure thing. In my mind, they'll probably be charging about $250,000 to upgrade that, to maybe increase some capacities as well as update all the costs.
I want to, we'll make sure that we circle back to that whole concept, Bill. I did notice Annie had her hand raised, and then I'll take Julie Marie.
Sure. I just wanted to add that we did explore the idea of co-packing with Smiling Hill, and whether it was because of their sort of shift in management or whatever was going on at the time, that I don't know if that's even an avenue for anybody to explore at this moment in time, or if or what's sort of going on there. So I just wanted to add that that's another co-packing opportunity that does not seem to exist. There are a few other options that we tried that did not come to fruition, either because people were just asking too much for, per square foot for rent, or it was not necessarily practical. So it's financially, it's that there's something to be said for going in with an established processor, because the startup costs would be so crazy high at this point in time. So
An established processor that does not appear to exist.
exactly.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
and Pineland Farms Dairy Company was our initial partner, and that's how we were able to gain a lot of great funding from USDA, and they just overnight decided that they didn't want to support our project. So I don't know what's going on up there, but I'm not sure what the plan is for that plant. So
Yeah.
just to give everybody sort of a basis of what what the landscape looks like now.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Julie Marie, I'll take you, and then I do want to move back to Bill to get a little bit more insights from all of you around ownership concepts, if that idea were to be pursued. Like, what is a logical ownership structure around something like that? Julie Marie.
Yeah, before we go there, I think there's we need to talk a little bit about what is our product line for, what are we going to pursue? Are we going to pursue a singular line of just fluid? Are we going to look at processing capacity that can do multiple types of products? Kind of the, if you will, the Holton Farms model, where you have multiple tailored product lines. I don't know how many people saw the report that went out from the department yesterday, that really only about 3.4, I think, is percent of the food that Mainers are buying comes from Maine. And I'm making a leap that there's going to be a lot of tools and a lot of messaging associated with trying to increase that number. So, we may have opportunities to tap into that. And so that will help our existing processors, fluid processors, our existing artisan processors. I guess, yeah. So there's those two thoughts about what should our product line be. And, we have this, we're on the cusp of, I guess, this new wave of promotion about Maine food.
Sure. And I will say that just even in the notes from your last meeting, my understanding was where you landed was that for all new processing plants, you are wanting to build in flexibility to process fluid milk and or various value-added products so that there would be allowance for pivoting with market changes. Bill,
Yes.
yeah, I lost track of where I was.
You're gonna put me on the horns again for something.
Yeah, I guess I am looking for a reaction from everyone around. I don't know to what extent you delved into this concept at the last meeting and whether you all have sort of some interest in pursuing that and thinking about how it could be financed and also thinking about ownership issues, or yeah, I'm just kind of looking to take the pulse of the group on this.
A little more information about, I'd mentioned that if we were to go forward to investigate whether a plant would really be feasible, in my mind, that there probably would have been, I would recommend that we increase the size of the plant by roughly about 1,600 square feet. This plant was designed to have all of the infrastructure in the ceiling. So things like water, steam, electricity, and whatnot comes down from the ceiling. So if you had an extra open space with not specifically something designed for it, it could have all of the piping for all of the various types of things that are needed to run an operation, manufacturing operation, could be left in the ceiling. And then if you wanted to have 2 or 3 or 4 rooms out of that 1,600 square feet, you could create separate sub-manufacturing facilities with just the equipment for that particular line of products being required. And then obviously the operating personnel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So reactions to that in general, number one, and number two, if interested in that concept, ownership models associated with it.
How about I say throw something out there?
Please.
In my mind, I would prefer to have a 5013C, basically to anchor it in Maine, not eliminating, but severely restricting the ability of an outside organization to come in and move it out of Maine or take it over. And at the same time, it would be open then for direct grants from foundations. Obviously, the other one is a co-op, and unfortunately, the national co-ops tend to operate like national producers, processors. It's tough to distinguish them from anybody else other than the fact that they have a membership base, but they seem to act like very similar to any other large corporation.
Can you just elucidate, can you elaborate a little bit in terms of what you mean from a producer perspective? You know, if our goal here is to maintain the dairy industry in the state, the difference in your mind is what?
If you have a for-profit entity, by definition, they're going to have to strive to make a profit. And if they have investors in general want you to keep making more profit. My concern is that the dairy industry, as any commodity industry is, squeezes everything out of every organization to make as much profit as they can. What they do with the profit is a whole different story. Co-ops generally try to have more coming back to the farmers themselves than any straight for-profit organization. So to that effect, they are a better guardian of the small producers. But I still feel that, while profit is a motive that is required, having that as the dominant requirement of this organization's existence, in my mind, starts to short circuit what we're trying to accomplish by creating a long-term processing solution for within the state of Maine.
Thank you. Others' reactions to that, very interested to hear, Andy, Steve, your thoughts as well as producers.
Well, I mean, I would just say that I mean, I definitely agree with Bill in terms. I mean, all you have to do is look at what the co-ops have been doing to the dairy farmers in the state of Maine when it comes to pay price, to see that that model is not working for dairy farmers in the state of Maine by and large, be it organic or conventional. And where the state of Maine, we live in a state that's an expensive place to produce milk. It's always going to be an expensive place to produce milk relative to places to our south and our west. And I think, I guess what I'm getting at is it's very hard for our farmers to be cost competitive on their own, which puts us at a disadvantage with other parts of the country. So I guess we're just going to continually be undercut. So the idea of having a Maine-based processor that is not a profit-driven entity, but a not-for-profit whose sole goal is to support farmers in the state, and provide, good, wholesome products to the people of the state, is a really intriguing idea. As far as I know, there's only one not-for-profit dairy processor in the country. It's in Washington State. Annie and I actually had a call with them a number of months ago. And they formed this nonprofit for the same reasons that we've been talking about in this task force. Just endless consolidation, really no viable path to profitability for, small to mid-scale producers. I mean, and I use that to describe basically every dairy producer in the state of Maine, because we're talking about there are 20,000 cow dairies being permitted in the upper Midwest. That is all the cows in the state of Maine. So that's just not going to happen here, at least not in the near future, because our land base doesn't allow it. So anyway, getting into the weeds here, I just think it's a really interesting idea. Different way of doing business. And again, it's not for profit. I mean, this is something that we came back to again and again, trying to start our own organic dairy processing business, is that if we go out in the for-profit sector, even if we leverage a bunch of grants, we're still going to have to get a bunch of money from investors who are going to want to see a certain amount of return on their investment that is going to prevent us from, largely, it's always the farmers who get screwed. So it's going to prevent us from paying the farmers what they need to get paid for their milk, first and foremost. So, the idea of having a plant that's run by a not-for-profit that is dedicated to offering processing for the dairy farmers of the state of Maine, offering new opportunities for co-packing for startups in the state. Yeah, it's just an interesting model, but I'd love to hear from, Steve and Steve.
Me too. Thank you so much, Andy. That's super helpful. And it would be good, after we do hear from both of the Steves, if you had any other information about the Washington example, in terms of how long it's been around, and does it seem like it's successful? So Steve, or Steve. I think we might have lost a Steve.
Well, I'll jump in for just a second. I mean, I think I wholeheartedly agree with that notion that, nonprofit, theoretically, or cooperative status. I mean, we're not in a business where we can expect to, find financial resources and then be able to pay those back in that sense. I mean, what we're really looking for is a mechanism to support existing, our farmers. And to me, the nonprofits seems like the most feasible solution to that. I mean, a cooperative model, I guess we all know it's really hard to go it alone. And it's risky. Then you get that risk of jumping in, in that cooperative, a newly formed cooperative. So I think it seems like a riskier proposition, but I definitely wonder, what kind of leverage can we get, from the state? What are our resources to try to form that nonprofit processing model? Because I think that's the only way that it's going to work.
And could just, if you all understand this perfectly, including you, Miriam, who's taking notes here, as to exactly why the co-op model does not serve Maine well, or has not served Maine well. Can somebody synthesize that just very succinctly before, and then I'll take you, Steve Keen, or if you want to answer that, Steve Keen, either way.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in unless,
Please.
Steve, you're actually part of a co-op. So by all means, if you want to answer that, go ahead.
Just a few comments. As far as the co-op I'm currently involved in, I'd agree with some of the previous comments about co-ops really not being a lot different than a singular owned company, because in the end, there needs to be profit, and because of there not being profit, and the co-op I'm involved in over the years, I think relied on their retail sales of branded product too much, and they didn't reinvest in all their facilities. And so now the farmers are being taxed to reinvest in new equipment and product line processing lines so that it can stay viable as a company. And I think there's light at the end of the tunnel, but there are farmers being lost in the process. So I would agree that to go a new co-op route, I'd be very leery as well. I do like the sound of a not-for-profit situation, but I would stress that if that is the route that people decide to go, I realize not for profit, but in whatever model that is, there needs to be thoughts, which I'm sure there would be, but just to stress that over time, it needs to be built in so that things can be, money can be reinvested to, just like any business, just to upgrade equipment, new technology. That's the way any business should be set up. And the co-op that we're involved in, I think, was mishandled for 20 plus years. And so that's why it shines so brightly in my mind right now. But I think it's an intriguing idea.
Very, very helpful. Thank you.
Can I also
please.
just throw
Thank
out
you.
that, I mean, the other issue with the existing cooperatives, I mean, which could potentially be different if there were a Maine only cooperative. But, when you look at like the crop cooperative, I mean, that includes farmers from here to Wisconsin. So when we talk pay prices, when organic dairy farmers in the state of Maine go back to crop and say, we're struggling, we're not making it on these prices, or really other farmers all throughout New England where cost of production is much higher than Wisconsin. It kind of falls on deaf ears, and they're like, well, we can make milk a lot cheaper in Western New York or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania than you. So, it just feels like the attitude is to watch our farms die, so that they can kind of get rid of us. Which, if we had a Maine focused nonprofit processor whose number one priority was to provide dairy farmers in the state of Maine with, living milk prices,
Yeah,
prices that they can actually live on. It just seems like it would completely change the model. So that's why it's, it's just, yeah, it's an intriguing idea. Very complicated. And I understand all the ways that this could go wrong. And actually, I probably don't understand all the ways it could go wrong because they're probably more than I can even imagine right now. Also, though, back to you had asked for more information on that Columbia Community Creamery in Washington. That's what it's called. And they are operating, like I said, as far as I know, they're the first not-for-profit dairy processor in the country. Part of why they set up as a not-for-profit, besides what I just said in terms of pay prices for farmers, was also because it's much simpler to raise money. It's a lot easier to get donations as a nonprofit than it is as a cooperative, in terms of tax law. And then what else was I going to say about them? They are operating at a very small scale. That is one thing I will say, though, is, it is it's an intriguing model. They're growing, is what I understand from following them on social media and the conversation Annie and I had earlier in the year. But yeah, I mean, in terms of scale of processing, I think they're more around like what the milk house, us here, are doing. I don't even think they're at a Smiling Hill level of production. So, trying to grow, but they're working with a bunch of farms who either all have their own on-farm processing going on, and they're diverting part of their milk supply to supply this not-for-profit processor, or farms that are shipping to a larger cooperative that is, frankly, not paying them enough to survive, but they're sending, they have a diversion policy to allow them to send a little bit to this community processor, this nonprofit, the Columbia Community Creamery, where they can get a better price on that milk. So, and their products are all pasteurized fluid products. So.
Got it. Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you. Bill, I'm going to take you, and then I'm just going to offer up a straw man of a recommendation as a starting point for trying to capture this, knowing that you'll have multiple opportunities to change it dramatically as you wish. Go ahead, Bill.
Things for Moo Milk, I raised $6.5 million as from investors because my farm was an L3C, limited liability, low profit company. It is similar to a B Corp, but it does permit a certain amount of profit, even though that was rare. And while the investors invested it as an investment, it was treated more of like a social investment. So I did at least attempt to, at various stages in this process, provide a sub-entity through which some losses that was being received by Moo Milk could be passed on to the investors. So financially, there's all kinds of things you can do, but I still think bottom line, it's better to be a not-for-profit.
Got it. Thank you. Well, this is messy, but what I had written a couple of days ago after I looked at the notes from the first meeting, but I've tweaked it in light of this conversation, could be support, a recommendation that says support through public investment, the development of a Maine-based nonprofit processing facility for, number one, organic milk, because that's what I've heard there's a need. And number two, with flexibility to create different processed dairy products, organic and non-organic, depending on market demand. Period.
Sounds pretty good to me.
Many details to be figured out, but what we're striving for here is to give the legislature some indication of where there could be opportunities, and many of which will likely require investment, financial investment. So trying to think about structuring recommendations in that way.
Jody, would you mind just typing that into the chat, actually?
Of course, and I can certainly provide that. We'll obviously provide that to you afterwards. So let me frame up another question or focus area for conversation, and then I'll give myself time to type while you're moving on to another topic, unless you want to continue on this one. Okay. Well, when I looked at the notes, let's see, there was the issue of how do we better support the existing processors. I do think that a conversation between someone and Rebecca between now and October 7th would be helpful. Who is the best person to do that? Is that within the department or externally? Julie Marie? Okay, let's plan on that. And then with Steve Keen focusing, following up with your contact at Oakhurst. Let's put that aside for a moment. We haven't really touched on how to better support smaller processors, on-farm processors that are accepting milk from other farms. Example right in the room here of Milk House. Can you all talk about that a little bit, aside from the issue that you've already identified around, the need for kind of better technical assistance when it comes to making changes and figuring out what the right changes are and how to find funding for them? You think on that while I type, or just start talking while I type.
Yeah, this is Bill Eldridge. I do believe that if we were to have a processing plant and its capacity was 1,000 gallons per hour, that's not going to impact either Hood or Oakhurst, who are processing 10,000 gallons an hour and multiple shifts. So, and if it's focused initially, at least in the organic sector, then there isn't really any competition close by at all. So at least to that extent, it's a positive. And within the plant, I'd mentioned that it was going to have the capacity to produce small lots, 5 gallons, or large lots, 100 to 500 gallons. So that if let's call it one or more small processors wanted to get together and had a brand or a product that they wanted to create, and it would be possible for them to have their milk processed by this entity. Obviously, there would be a processing fee and a shipping fee, but they could have processed milk at a cost that they probably would not be able to equal in their own shop, and have the means to create products from pasteurized milk that would meet most conditions in the marketplace.
Because we have one, I think one, not more than one, but if I'm mistaken, just let me know. We have one person on in this group that's in this situation where you are an on-farm processor accepting milk from another farm or farms. And Steve, in your situation as the supplier of that, of that milk, I'm very interested to hear from both of your perspectives. If we were part of what I'm hearing is it's safer, it's easier, it's something to invest in existing processing capacity where there may be opportunities for expansion, making a lot of assumptions here, Andy, than it is to build a facility out of whole cloth. Are there ways, even if it's not applicable to your direct farm, you certainly have the in-person experience of this, of what is needed to better support and farms in your situation, processors in your situation, I guess I should say.
Sorry, my internet is not great today, apparently, and it cut out in the middle of that. Are you asking, are we moving beyond the plant idea as to what other things are needed to support value-added producers on their farms, or are we talking in relation to this nonprofit plant idea, how it could support? producers.
Sorry, no, I was moving on. I was
Okay.
saying we put aside this idea of a plant that's not tied to an individual farm, that we look at the existing on-farm capacity in Maine. I've been hearing throughout this meeting and full task force meetings that it is likely more likely to be productive to expand existing capacity than it is to build capacity out of whole cloth. So it's really a question of like, what's needed to better support farms like yours, Andy, that are doing that currently. And, to help them expand, even if you're not in that boat, I don't know if you are or not, but yeah, to enable that to happen more successfully or more easily.
Sure, gotcha. Well, I guess I'm just going to start with just to tie it back to the last concept. The most important thing for all dairies in the state is for us to have neighbors who are farming. And honestly, I'm really concerned about the tipping point that we seem to be nearing, where even value-added producers like Steve and I aren't going to be able to make it because we're not going to have grain suppliers or any of the other support network that we all rely on. So anything we can do to prop up the rest of the dairies in the state with better pay prices through perhaps a nonprofit processor would be beneficial for everyone. And I don't see it as any sort of competition. We're already competing with national brands that are selling products that are arguably similar. So something that we've talked about in a previous meeting, more technical support. We definitely have struggled with this through the AIP process with some equipment we got that now turns out isn't really well suited to our needs. And it was a lot of just trying to figure it out on our own. We asked our dairy inspector some questions, but that's not really their job, is to tell us how to design a plant. So anything that we could do to help value-added producers figure out how to improve the efficiency of their processing and scale up. It's definitely another way to, it's definitely another thing that is needed in the state, because I kind of see these as, the two models that might actually provide a future for dairy in Maine are going to be on-farm processing of your own milk, or, in the model that Winter Hill is moving towards, of one or more other farms processing their milk. Or having some sort of larger processor that is deeply committed to Maine dairy.
Great, thank you. Steve, did you have anything that you wanted to add to that? Steve Berger?
Yeah, I think that, I think the thing that jumped out to me that Andy said that I would echo is that we need to be able to support all dairy farms, because that lack of, that tipping point on infrastructure is what I worry about. And when I look at our business and think about our business's future, which, probably at some, it will not involve milking cows. It will involve us processing milk from Milk House and other farms that we want to be able to buy high quality milk from. So now, my worry will shift from my own dairy cows to the stability of other dairy herds in our region, and knowing that we'll have a secure supply of milk down the road. And I can't say technical assistance enough. We've been in the exact same boat that Andy has mentioned. There's just a real lack of technical assistance in the state. It's been hard to access, and it makes it really difficult to be able to answer those questions that you've got to answer to be able to scale. So I think anything we can do to push for technical assistance is going to be super important. It's really impossible for us to plan and scale and design and do things without it. And I think that could just be a springboard for businesses like us to be able to expand. I think there is some, I think that I get a sense that there is room in the dairy processing community. And what I would mean by that is the small craft dairy processing community in Maine, for growth and for better connections between small processors and farms in the state. I think for a lot of us, for us small producers who are processing in-house, the answer for us is not to try to make more milk, but to be able to work with our dairy partners, and work together. And any ways that we can help facilitate that connection, along with that technical assistance aspect, I think are going to be very key.
Right. Well, just looking at the notes from the other subgroup, the third subgroup that focused on funding and technical assistance, there are some initial thoughts or recommendations coming out of that group. That group will meet tomorrow for the second time. That at least covers the technical assistance points that both of you just made. So we will work further on that, but it gets at exactly what you're talking about, and also the technical assistance needed in business planning and succession and transition planning and so on, grant writing. It's a wide range of issues here, but certainly processing issues as well. Okay, we can work on that. Any other thoughts that you want to add to this issue of how to better support on-farm processing before I turn to public members to get their input, so you have the benefit of that before before you continue on your conversation? Bill, go ahead.
Firmly that the state has to be able to get reinvestment in the necessary expertise to support everything that Steve, Annie, Andy, everybody else has said. And that probably requires adding capability through some financial means to some of our educational institutions. And I further believe that there's got to be baked into this a way to help move the farmers down in their cost of production side. That there's got to be something at the front end to help the farmers also be as competitive as they can be in producing their milk. So,
yeah,
just some thoughts.
Sure. Yeah, thank you. All right, well, let me turn to, we've got two members of the public on the line who've offered public comments in the past, so I'm assuming that maybe you will again. We've got Representative Pluker, we've got Jenny Tilton Flood. Either of you, would you care to join the conversation?
No, I'm fine. Thank you so much for everybody being there and putting in the time today.
Okay, thank you, Representative Jenny.
Yeah, thank you for allowing the time. And I know that I missed part of the meeting, but I'm wondering, because again, the focus seems to be about on farm, though I did hear the conversation to be had with processors, and that's incredibly important. And the mention of the stakeholder industries, I worry and wonder, more rather than worry, if approaching this as a whole business instead of deeply siloed attempt to work on our sector might be beneficial. Are there already economic initiatives that could be beneficial for processors or those who want to become processors, or developments within the state that maybe are flying under the radar of the dairy sector, just because we're not accustomed to looking outside of the department or a certain stream, and like the Dirigo Business Initiative? And also, are there possible, as a recommendation from the committee, is it possible for a legislative economic investment or initiative that would look not just simply at a dairy farm or a processor, but the other stakeholders? Because again, it doesn't really matter if we have a good milk check if our costs are way too high, and it doesn't really matter if our costs are really too high and we have a really milk. I mean, they all have to work. That we need them all for the higher tide. So those are my concerns and my comments. And once again, I have not been able to string them in a cohesive, coherent manner. So sorry.
No worries. No, thank you. No apologies. Great. Okay. Let's just look once again at the notes from the last meeting, if we could, for a moment. There were some on the second page of those notes, there was discussion about whether regionally, I know you've had a lot of conversation up to this point in this meeting about, there ought to be something Maine-based, it should be nonprofit. Part of the conversation that you had last time about what was, would there be benefits to working more regionally, making updates or investing in infrastructure more financially viable by working regionally, growing available markets by doing so, improving economies of scale, existing or tapping into existing regional processing infrastructure that needs updating, rather than exclusively that in Maine. Just want to get your reactions to that, because that's quite different than what you've been talking about thus far today.
I guess I would just chime in that, as opposed to the concept, the Maine-based dairy processing nonprofit concept, I'd be curious to know how we could make regional investments that we then would be guaranteed that the investments that we make are actually going to benefit Maine dairy farmers.
Mhm.
Whereas if there were an entity in the state of Maine, the board comprised of Maine dairy farmers and others who are committed to our industry, I think we can feel pretty confident that whatever public investments there are would actually benefit the people of Maine. So, but there might be something that I'm missing there.
Mhm, mhm. Others' reactions? Bill?
I think some of the earlier comments that co-ops, which basically have regional appearances, Maine's dairy farmers seem to get the short end of the stick no matter what happens. So if we don't protect our own, we're probably going to be in trouble.
Anybody have a different perspective than what Andy and Bill have shared? Julie Marie.
It's not necessarily contrary to what Andy and Bill are saying. It's just taking us in a different direction, building off what Jenny said, that, we do need to look at this industry in its totality. And that includes the ag infrastructure that supports all of us. Andy mentioned it at one point that if we don't keep that critical mass, those are the services that we're going to lose, which are only going to make things more expensive in Maine. And so maybe when we talk regionally, we can find ways to support those businesses, especially those that we don't have as many of in Maine, to encourage them on a regional level to include Maine, to give us more, find some way to give us more access on those things, but not necessarily. I would agree that at least the track we're going right now, it'd be kind of hard to do a nonprofit and keep it geared to helping Maine's industry if we made that a regional effort, because we are in the region, we are not the biggest dairy sector in the region. We lose out to Vermont and New York and Pennsylvania, even though we're the 5th largest in the Northeast. And so, you know, if there's a way that we can capitalize on that, find ways to grow our access to those services that might help lower our costs, maybe, you know, that's the effort. And that could just be marketing, that could be the state offering some incentives for companies to either remain in the state doing business or to come back to Maine.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. All right, then I do want to just touch quickly on some other avenues to change that you discussed last time. Well, I don't know, maybe we have covered these. You know, the other ones were exploring cooperatives. I think we've discussed that. Improving technical assistance for on-farm processing. Duly noted, we will be trying to come up with a recommendation that specifically addresses that. Processing that leverages support of local dairies. You know, these sort of niche emerging interests, glass milk bottling, locally inspired flavors, other niche products. We didn't really talk about that directly, other than just to say that if there were an in-state processing facility, that it would, you would want the flexibility to be creating products that are based on changing markets. Is there anything more that you want to say about that kind of, those specific opportunities? Anything that we, you know, aren't adequately capturing in a general recommendation around a Maine-based nonprofit processing facility? Bill?
I think you've pretty well captured pretty much everything.
Okay. And then the last one is, you know, for all new processing plants, build in flexibility. So I think we've covered that. All right, let me give you like 1 or 2 minutes to just review the notes from the last meeting and let me know whether there's anything in addition that you feel like we haven't covered that we should spend a few minutes on before wrapping up. And so I guess one kind of complementary question is, have we addressed the organic issue sufficiently by building that into the recommendation that's in the chat?
I think yes.
I'm just going to pipe up that I think it doesn't matter organic or conventional. I think we're talking about similar challenges, and whatever processing recommendations we might make, they ought to be flexible enough so that it can serve both models in some way, or, you know, at least have that opportunity. I know, you know, our organic provides a much stricter inspection requirements and things like that, but it would not preclude necessarily doing, you know, also doing a conventional line. And I think we need to build in that flexibility, because I don't think we have enough critical mass of either conventional or organic right now to you know, have that long-term stability that we'd like to see. I think we have the ability to grow it, but we can't put the cart before the horse. You know, we need to be able to have as many opportunities to make that processing venture successful, and then we can aim to specialize, whether it be a specific market or products types, that type of thing.
Sure. I did bury the lead here. I completely forgot. I'm glad I printed it out. Lee Chase, who was unable to make the meeting today, she said, she wrote me an email on Monday and wrote, "Good morning. My apologies for not notifying you sooner. Oh, I'm sorry, unable to attend the meeting. Per last week's discussion within the smaller group, I wanted to follow up and share with you that I recently met with my dairy peers from Stop and Shop, Food Lion, Giant Company, and Giant Foods, and we all agreed that production for organic milk in the Northeast region would be extremely beneficial. Demand is strong and capacity continues to be a challenge. So a focus on this effort is something that we would advocate for as well as support. I'll be sure to review the meeting notes and follow up." So I was a little confused by the wording of that. I didn't have the opportunity to follow up with her. I wasn't sure if what she was suggesting was that the actual production, the lack of production, like the lack of enough organic milk, or the lack of processing capacity for that milk regionally. But, and perhaps she meant both. But, and maybe some of you closer to this better understand the point, but I didn't want to forget to share that. Just emphasizes, I think, the need for supporting the organic sector.
I mean, I think some of that, my understanding, and I'm not, involved in this on a daily basis, but my understanding is that part of the reason that the Hannaford brand Nature's Promise milk is all processed from Aurora, Colorado, even the milk in our grocery stores here in New England, is because there is not enough organic processing capacity in the Northeast to actually have it be local milk. So yeah. I can't speak for Hannaford if that's of interest to them to relocate that processing if there were the capacity, although I certainly would hope it would be. But yeah, anyway, it seems like there's a lot of potential. So
yeah, great. Okay, well that's good. Sorry to insert that late in the conversation, but I just remembered. I think we may be at a good stopping point unless I'm overlooking something, and then it will be our charge to boil these down into some recommendations that once we have the third subgroup, subgroup's second meeting tomorrow, we'll start drafting those notes and getting them out to you well in advance of October 7th. Steve Keen, go ahead.
I just got an email from Dustin from Oakhurst, and he said that we've been meeting on this information internally, and we have another meeting on this topic early next week. So we can provide you with an accurate, complete response at that point. So I will follow up with him late next week, and I will send you, Jody, the information at that point.
That sounds great. Thank you so much. And maybe we could plan to have the same thing, the same process, Julie Marie, that you send me whatever feedback you get from Rebecca, and I will, we'll figure out what to do with it based on what the content says and whether to send that out in advance or somehow incorporate that into draft recommendations or whatever. I won't know until we see it, but okay. Sounds like a plan. I think this was a really productive meeting. I hope you all do too. And we'll meet again. So it's October 7th that you all will be together as a full group. If some of you are joining the funding and technical assistance subgroup meeting tomorrow, that is on Zoom. It's from 11:30 to 1:30. And then you will receive the meeting packet for the October 7th meeting by September 27th, and we'll have a meeting room announced at that point. Thank you. Have a good afternoon. Mary.